each of you talk about whether religion should play some sort of role in the court's decision. How about that?
Okay, let me say.
Well, we'll go this way. Ryan, you can.
Sure. I don't make a religious argument about this. The perspective that me and my co-authors come from is one informed by philosophy. It looks to Aristotle as not saying this is what he thought, therefore it's right, but he gave us a methodology for how to think about institutions. He gave us an insight on how to analyze institutions. He told us look at the actions that they engage in, look at the goods that they're ordered towards, and look at the norms, the commitments that they make to each other. We thought what makes the marital commitment different than other sorts of commitment, what makes the marital relationship different than other commitments, precisely through that tripartite lens. Look at the acts that they engage in, the goods that they pursue, and then the norms that they commit by. So it's purely a philosophical view. We think our philosophical view is a plausible one. We happen to think it's the true one. We think our opponent's philosophical view is plausible. We happen to think it's a false one at the end of the day. We don't think our Constitution requires either. We don't think our Constitution forbids either. We think this is a discussion for citizens to be thinking through these issues and then voting on.
Okay, Austin, religion?
Yeah, I think religion does play a role to the extent that we're dealing with the question of animus and whether marriage laws are the product of unconstitutional animus towards gays and lesbians. And so where religion comes in is one of the key cornerstones of animus has to do with whether a law is novel. So when you look at the law in the Romer case or Federal Doma, it's something that had never before been done. The Supreme Court kind of characterized it in some respect as a coming out of left field. Congress had never before defined marriage, and this is new. Why are they doing it? We have to find out. It's animus. Okay, you can't make that argument about marriage laws. You just can't. They existed before this country existed. Okay, like in Virginia became a colony in 1607. It was one man and one woman before the idea of same-sex marriage even popped into somebody's brain. So the religious traditions and the history of marriage and the existence of these marriage laws throughout all these religious traditions and cultures and everything that inform the melting pot that becomes America absolutely wipes out the idea that marriage laws are new and therefore unconstitutional animus. And I think to that end, in terms of this constitutional debate, that's where they are significant.
Okay, thank you, Austin. Steve?
Actually, at least one of the states in this litigation, Kentucky, actually had no definition of marriage up until the time the idea of same-sex marriage came around. And then, in this sort of hair-on-fire backlash of the mid-90s and beyond over the possibility of same-sex marriage, they passed a statute, then a constitutional amendment prohibiting the legislature, prohibiting the state courts, prohibiting a majority of the state's citizens from being able to ever change the definition of marriage. Those categorical, impossible to change constitutional amendments are what's been unusual. But to address briefly the question of religion, I think the audience member's point would come as a surprise to Episcopalians, Presbyterians, members of the Disciples of Christ, members of conservative Judaism, members of Reform Judaism, all of whom have embraced marriage. And finally, I think we need to remember the state judge that sent Mildred and Richard Loving to prison after they got an interracial marriage said, God created the races white, Malay, yellow, and red, and white, black, Malay, and red, and but for interference with and placed them on separate continents, and but for interference with his plan, we wouldn't need to be here. We need to separate out religious conceptions as valid and as vital and as wonderful as they are, those traditions, those ceremonies, those beliefs, from our civil law and what the Constitution says about who may be excluded from public benefits and public civil institutions.
Okay, Robbie?
First of all, let me say that I live in the heart of Greenwich Village. So I live in the den of the den. And despite what Ryan said, we have in my building and in my neighborhood lots of gay couples raising kids, lots of straight couples raising kids, lots of older single parents without kids, etc. I'm not aware of any polyamorous families living anywhere in my neighborhood in Greenwich Village. So again, I think it's really, it's one of these things that people say to scare people, but there's no organized political movement of polyamorous people out there. And if there were, they'd be in the village, and I don't see them every day. As for the separation, or the religious point, I'm a deeply religious person. And I believe in the Hebrew Bible and the rabbinic tradition, and consistent with my view of conservative Judaism, says that each human being is made in the divine image, and that affording full dignity to every person is a religious obligation. and that we are commanded as religious people to pursue social justice. It arises from the biblical injunction that it is not good for a person to be alone, and that the opportunity to create a family is an essential aspect of our humanity and our obligation to express as fully as possible the image of God reflected within every person. So what that means, I think, is that different religious people have different views on this. We can respect different religious people's different views on this, and that's the genius of our Constitution, because that's why we have a First Amendment in this country, and that's why we respect religious pluralism, and that's why these issues need to be decided on constitutional principles and not based on religious belief.